Hello and welcome back to the second episode of my bust painting series. In today's video I want to show you how I painted the face and the helmet using oil paints over the acrylic pre-coloring I made in the first episode. So let's get started. Here you can see the paints I want to use. With the upper ones I will be mixing the basic skin tones, and the lower ones will be used for detailing later. And odorless thinner and liquid for thinning and blending the paint. First I place the oil paints on a piece of cardboard to dry them out and get rid of the linseed oil. Like this you avoid a glossy painting result later. And here I spread them out with a toothpick so they have more contact to the cardboard and let them dry for a few hours. Then I transfer the paints to my palette, which is white tile, using my palette knives here. And with the palette knives I also started to mix the basic skin tone. I mixed Terra Rosa with yellow ochre in almost equal parts, but a bit more Terra Rosa, so it's more reddish than orange. And I like keeping my palette clean in between. Then I added a slight amount of cobalt blue to darken the mix, but it's a very powerful color, so you have to be careful here. And this is a basic skin tone which we will use for mixing shadows and highlights. Here I'm starting to add white and Naples yellow to the mix for the first highlight color, but I soon realized I prepared not enough white, so I placed some more on a cardboard and continued with the shadow colors. I mixed 3 shadow colors, adding cobalt blue and Terra Rosa, and adding more and more the darker the paint became. Then I continued to mix the highlight paints using titanium white and Naples yellow and ended up with 4 lighter and 4 darker paints. These are the brushes I will use, mainly Winsor and Newton and Princeton. It's a good idea to use good brushes and divide them between darker and lighter paints so they don't get too messy. Then it was finally time to get some paint onto the set. I began with applying the first darker shadow paint into the places where the pre-coloring I made in the first episode showed me the shadows would be. I used a filbert brush for blending the edges and get a smoother transition. After the first layer was dry, I added the second shadow paint. This was applied more sparingly and in a smaller area than the first layer. In this early painting stage I used a mix of thinner and liquid for thinning and blending the paints. Liquid is really a great medium for thinning and blending oil paints. When I started using oil paints, I used the liquid a lot because it was easier for me blending the edges smooth with liquid. But you have to keep in mind that liquid dries out glossy, and depending what finish you are looking for, you maybe have to knock that down with a coat of flat varnish. And here you can see me mixing in the background the third shadow color with the liquid thinner mix. The third shadow color was applied very precise compared to the other ones, only in the very darker spots like under the chin, under the nose, the eyes, inside the ears. I will increase the video speed here from time to time because I wanted to show this complex painting progress as detailed as possible without being too boring. And the fourth shadow color was applied only in the very darkest spots, like under the eyes, inside the mouth, under the nose and under the chin. The brush I am using here is a Princeton shortliner, a very precise brush and ideal for jobs like this. When I'm done for the day or take a break, I cover everything up so it's dust free and the paints stay fresh and workable longer. Now it was time to start adding the first highlight colors, and this was done in the places where the pre-coloring showed me the lighter spots would be. And I here of course switched to the brushes for the lighter paints. The maybe now hard edges and transitions will be refined later in the detailed painting progress. And here the second highlight color was applied a bit more precise. Please ignore the neck area for now, as I wasn't really happy how it turned out and I will later repaint it, so ignore this part for now. Then I grabbed me some golden Baroque red from Old Holland to add some red tones to the shadows. This paint will be used a lot from now on because its nice red tone brings a lot to a more lifelike look for this face. To make it look even more lifelike, I flooded the whole surface with thinner and made a very thin filter using golden Baroque red, and this adds some more life to the highlight paints. And after that was dry, I continued to work the red tones into the shadows. For some variation, I mixed golden Baroque and Terra Rosa in almost equal parts and created a even more reddish tone, which I worked into the darker places and shadows and crevices and folds. As this bust is supposed to be set in a winter scene, I mixed a purple tone and started to work it into the shadows. Like this, I wanted to suppress the slight orange look and bring it more into a flashy direction. To indicate a 5 o'clock and bearded shadow, I used indigo and applied it in the lower face area, like the jaw, around the chin, where this bearded shadow would be. This paint is applied very diluted and you have to be very careful, as it can turn out too blue if you overdo it here. It's in general a good idea to apply several thin layers instead of one thick one. After that I applied the last two highlight paints, and this is the third highlight paint I applied on the more exposed areas, like on the cheeks and the forehead, the nose, the chin. And the fourth and last highlight paint very sparingly in small amounts on the most raised areas. Like I mentioned before, I wasn't happy with how the neck area turned out, and here I start to repaint it. As you can see, it's never too late to change or correct things you don't like or which didn't work out, and even if it's not a fun task, it's all possible. From now on, it was all about refining details and getting the shapes of the shadows and the skin tones into a good direction, and I here add a mix of permanent red and golden baroque red to bring a more lifelike look into the skin tones. I would say that maybe the first 70% of the painting progress you don't feel very comfortable because it looks weird and awkward and you think, what am I doing here? And the whole picture basically comes together with almost the last brush strokes. So don't get yourself encouraged because it looks not good from the beginning. You really have to stay with it and keep on pushing. Here I'm using the permanent red and golden baroque red mix for painting the lips. And these two were built up in several layers. In this stage of the progress I made a lot, almost countless layers of glazes with purple and red tones over the lighter skin tones to lose this white look a bit and get it more into a lifelike, flashy direction. And to re-emphasize the most raised spots like the nose or the chin, I used again the third highlight paint to brighten these spots up a bit. But this time this paint was diluted even more to let the layers underneath shine through. And for the last details I use Payne's Gray to emphasize the darker spots like the bearded shadow inside the ears or under the eyes even more without that bluish direction from the indigo. Basically everything I know about bust painting I learned from Small Soldier and his YouTube guides. He's a great artist and my idol when it comes to bust painting, and he might recognize some techniques I'm using here as well as the reference picture in the background maybe. So make sure to check out his channel for busts, figures and much more. And with that being said, we are basically done with this part, the face, and can move on. As you will see, I'm by far an expert for painting hair. I started with a dark brown base paint and lighten it up to emphasize some raised hair strains and spots. And after I lighten it up even more, I ended up with an old man's look. To suppress this, I made a wash with burnt and raw umber to get it more into a dark direction again. It's a good thing that almost the complete hair section will be covered under the helmet and it's almost not visible. So you better don't take this special part not as a tutorial but more as a documentation. For painting the helmet, I mixed a for me suitable green tone consisting of sap green and yellow ochre and darkened it with cobalt blue. I then made two darker tones, adding raw and burnt umber, and two lighter versions with adding white. I then started with painting the basic tone into the darker areas, roadmapped by the pre-coloring. And the two darker tones were then worked into the more shadowed areas, always after the previous layer dried. Of course, blending was necessary here too for smoother color transitions. For some more optical interest, I worked some dark scratches into the light areas and light scratches into the dark areas, but this was almost not visible when I was done painting the helmet. It's just sometimes that you try things out while painting and later realize it was not worth the effort. And as a wise man once said, where shadows are, there is light. So I applied the two lighter versions of this paint on the more exposed parts of the helmet. To speed up the dry times, I can highly recommend to get a slow cooker or crock pot. 20 minutes on low and the paint is dry enough to continue working. But you have to be very careful, as this thing can also melt resin, so you better set yourself a timer if you get distracted or you don't want to forget your painted piece in this thing. In Small Soldier's Popeye video there is a scary example of what can go wrong using these things. After applying all shadow and highlight colors, I flooded the surface with thinner again and used the darker tones and pure sap green in several thin glazes to unify the surface. Again using the slow cooker after every layer to dry the piece before continuing with the next layer. For some more interest and texture, I used one of the lighter colors, mixed it with liquid and applied it in a stippling motion. Like this, I wanted to imitate a worn out look and break up the optical surface a bit. Liquid was perfect for this job, so I accepted the shine that resulted in using it for the better result. And to knock that shine down, I made two very thin glazes with the darkest tone to finish the surface. As a big fan of Band of Brothers, I obviously wanted this guy to be in the 2nd Battalion of the 506. So I painted the insignia on both sides of the helmet. For that I grabbed me some white oil paint and a good brush and painted the basic shape of the insignia. And with a flat shader brush moistened with thinner, I could then rework or correct the shape, or even remove it completely if it came out very bad or useless. And to be honest, I needed several tries until I was satisfied with the shape and the position. But as you just saw, you can correct almost everything using oil paints. Not perfect, but it will do the job. When removing the white oil paint, there was always staying some white pigment, and to suppress that I made two thin glazes around the badge. To make it look more worn out and not freshly painted, I worked some Payne's Grey into the badge to make it look a bit more translucent. I base painted the leather chin strap with raw umber as a basic paint, and then made a thin glaze with burnt sienna to get it into a more leather-like warm direction. And with thicker burnt sienna I added some scratches and wear and tear to the strap. And for finishing and unifying the surface, made a thin glaze with the basic paint raw umber. For the rear chin strap I mixed me a green tone consisting of sap green, yellow naples and yellow ochre, and with that base painted the strap. With Payne's Grey I worked some shadows into the more hidden areas of the strap. And as I was just using this paint, I used it for the backside of the helmet to make it look more darker and shadowed. To give the strap a more fabric-like look, I made countless dots with white oil paint. And turned down the white shine a bit with using a very thin glaze of the basic green tone. Okay, last finishing touches. The metal parts were base painted with black oil paint. And some chipping was made with copper acrylic paint. And to make the edge of the helmet more used and worn out, I used natural steel for some metal chips. And with very thin black glaze I knocked down the copper shine a bit, so it doesn't look too fresh and new. Finally it was time to glue the helmet to the head, and of course I made sure the helmet was sitting straight. And with that we finally made it. Thank you all for enduring this with me. I hope it was interesting and not too boring. I would really like to know what you think about it, and I'm looking forward to your feedback. And if you like what you saw, please consider subscribing. The next episode will be about painting the uniform, and I hope to welcome you back then. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching, stay safe and be careful with that slow cooker.